For years, I have been dedicating my life and all of my free time to the sole pursuit of crafting a game, nay, an experience, on par with the greatest game of all time, Cory in the House for the Nintendo DS. And after all this time, I still think I'm nowhere close, but I'm definitely a lot closer. Where I left off in the last video, which I dropped about 6 months ago, Jesus, I had just finished the final update to what I'm calling Legacy Eclipsic. I added textures to blocks and an entire new boss fight and tier of gear. It was a pretty good update, but I had some thoughts about it scratching at the back of my head. See, there were some limitations of this engine, some limitations that couldn't be fixed. First, all the UI in the game was hard-coded, manually written into place by hand. This works if you're just trying to get something on screen and working as fast as possible, but it's clunky and it makes it much harder to try and add in new windows and inventories later on, which becomes a problem, especially if you're planning several new crafting stations later down the line. Second, Legacy Eclipsic wasn't moddable. When I started work on Legacy Eclipsic, I wanted to make it moddable, so in an act of profound stupidity, I separated all of the item source files, thinking that this would make it possible for players to create their own source files, and thus their own custom items. What I forgot was that source code needs to be compiled before it can be run, and for various reasons, that's not possible for you guys to do. Thus, it's impossible to mod Legacy Eclipsic. Third, and finally, the game wasn't multiplayer. This wasn't actually a massive reason to restart development, but because I did restart development, I was free to actually add multiplayer. After thinking about it long and hard, I eventually decided to restart. I opened the new project and began work. The very first thing I worked on was the new dynamic UI system. I knew I needed to make it customizable at runtime for ease of use and modability, so I put a lot of work into making sure that that was possible. Each window can be moved and resized, and each one has a customizable layout defined by code. This way, modders, including myself, can create any kind of window they want. After the basics of the UI were created, I decided to work on the actual game. I quickly re-implemented textures in the exact same way I added them last time, and started work on the game's collisions. In the last two games, the collisions were not great. In the first version of Eclipsic, they made the game basically unplayable when combined with the buns movement. I don't know what I was thinking when implementing that code. I used lasers, which worked half the time for smaller things and broke with larger things. In the second version of Eclipsic, I used a much more reasonable axis-aligned bounding box approach, which is actually a reasonable method, testing a rectangle representing the player or a mob against all nearby blocks. This works a lot better, but it still has its issues. For instance, if you're moving way too fast, you can shoot straight through solid blocks. This is called tunneling, and it's a common issue with discrete collision detection methods like this one. To solve tunneling, you have to use continuous collision detection. See, in the world of collision detection, there are two distinct families, discrete and continuous. Discrete collision is faster and it's easier to implement because it operates solely on each individual frame. But it comes with its fair share of issues, tunneling included. Continuous collision detection simulates collision between frames, meaning it's impossible to tunnel through blocks, and collision is generally less broken. There's a bunch of different methods to doing continuous collision detection, but the one I chose is something I'm calling the Minkowski method. It's called the Minkowski method because the first step is taking the Minkowski sum. Basically, it's a way of adding two shapes, where the result is one shape slid along the edges of the other shape, which creates a mix of the two. What makes the Minkowski sum useful is that any collision between two shapes can be reduced to the collision of the Minkowski sum and a point, and in the case of a moving object, the sum and a line. What's doubly useful about the Minkowski sum is that the Minkowski sum of two rectangles that aren't rotated is another rectangle. This means that I can turn any problem that looks like this into a problem that looks like this, and as you can probably tell, trying to find the specific collision point of this polygonal shape and this rectangle is a lot harder than finding the specific collision point of this line and this rectangle, which makes the Minkowski method really, really nice. What's even nicer about this is that it makes the collision response really simple as well. We just have to place the moving box centered on the collision between the line and the sum, and that's collision done, and there's no tunneling whatsoever. There are some edge cases, or more accurately corner cases, where the player can phase through the corner of blocks, but it's not a massive issue, and it happens pretty rarely, and you can just jump out. After the collisions were done, I could finally get started on everything else in the game. Menus, inventories, items, mobs, it was all coming together pretty fast. That was until I thought of a new feature, dimensions.
The Nether.
See, when developing Terraria, Realogic only ever added support for one dimension, the overworld. When modders came along, they wanted to add their own, and so a lot of time was spent splicing together support for new dimensions. It's called the Subworld Library. I don't have the luxury of source code altering mods due to the limitations of Lua, so I have to add in dimension support myself. Because I already implemented like 70% of what's in the game right now, I had to rework a lot of code, that being every single time anything accessed the world at all. I also had to add support for custom world generation, which is still to this day unfinished. The entire world is generated in one frame, meaning that if your code is complex, like mine is, the game just freezes. I also had to rework world saving and loading entirely. The world is now saved as a run-length encoded flat array inside a JSON inside a zip file, compressing the whole world to about 2 megabytes. Of course, the more dimensions you add with mods, the larger it's going to be, and the longer it's going to take to load for other players. On the topic of multiplayer, that's been added too. There's a little bit of extra thinking modders will have to do to make sure that their mods don't glitch out in multiplayer, but most code should sync effortlessly, no networking required. I have some more plans for multiplayer, and it's probably still buggy, but I'm looking forward to seeing people having fun together in Eclipsec. Finally, after all the base features were added, I added a couple extra touches, like a setting menu, and I got to work on the actual gameplay. I worked on each biome in sequence. First came the plains, which gets just one enemy, the bushling. The bushling is probably the weakest mob, and it drops resin, which can be used to make torches. That much hasn't changed. Underground, however, there's now the skeleton, bat, and red slime. The bat and slime don't drop anything useful yet, but the skeleton drops poison vials, which can be used to craft various things, as well as the rogue weapon, very creatively titled the large poison vial. Then I added 2 enemies to the desert, the revenant and the sand drifter. The sand drifter is just a basic worm type enemy, but the revenant is a fighter that dashes towards you, and it drops rags, which can be used to craft the sandman set. Next came the jungle, which got the chitinous crawler, green slime, and carniflora, and finally the tundra, which got the blue slime and the frost spawn, which drops ice cores to create the permafrost set. The dungeon also has 2 mobs, the cyberman and living wire, which drop mechanical scrap. Mechanical scrap is important because it can be used to summon the one and only corrupted automaton Datalus. To do this, you need to find one of these corrupt beacons and right-click it with a piece of scrap. You can take this corrupt beacon to the surface with you if you want, but it's cooler and harder to fight him in the dungeon. I'm really happy with Datalus this time around, and I think he's a lot cooler than he was last time. First off, his sprite has been updated, as well as his theme. You'll have to play the game to hear the full thing, but I'll play a bit of it now. It was made very graciously by Eski for free, as well as some biome themes that I'll add later. Datalus has 3 phases this time around. The first phase is nothing special. He chases you, fires missiles and energy beams from his cannon, and sometimes summons a barrage from the sky. His second phase is much of the same, except he attacks faster and he can rocket around. His third phase is really cool, and I don't want to spoil it for you, so if you're gonna play the game blind, skip forward like 30 seconds. Anyways, in his third phase, he breaks apart. One of his arms comes off and starts flying around, while the other breaks in half. Every couple seconds, the flying arm will smash down, dealing contact damage, while the broken arm has 2 attacks. The first is a spew of fleshy chunks, and the other is this giant tentacle which deals massive contact damage. When he does this whip attack, he'll be on cooldown for a long time, so then is a good time to get in and deal some contact damage. Unfortunately, for as much work as I put into the boss fight itself, there's no reward for killing Datalus currently. I'm trying to get this video out as soon as possible, so I didn't have time to add much post-boss. That'll come in the next video, as well as various fixes and additions, including keybinds, a world customization and generation screen, as well as custom player movement and fixes to any bugs you guys find in the coming months. There's a Discord server you can join if you want help with the game, or help with modding, or just want to talk about game dev. I'll put it in the description and possibly even the pinned comment if I feel like it. Again, thanks to Eski for help with the music and some sprite work, as well as some thanks to some of my community members for help with other assets. Finally, before I'd go, I'd like to share some fan art that was made in between now and the last video. And that's all for today. As always, press all the buttons under the video or I'll find you. My name has been and might continue to be console.log, and goodbye.